He left the envelope on the breakroom table at 6:47 in the morning. $94,000, cash. He did not seal it. He did not write a name on it. He set it down next to the coffee maker that had been broken for 3 weeks and walked out of the room before anyone saw him come in. Her name was Constance Webb. She was 51 years old. She had been cleaning the surgical wing of Mercy Harbor Medical Center for 11 years, the overnight shift 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. She earned $16.40 an hour. She knew the smell of every floor in that building the way other people know the smell of their own kitchen. Bleach on the trauma bays, antiseptic and something sweeter on the pediatric ward. Floor 3 had a particular cold that came through the vents no matter the season, and she had learned to wear an undershirt beneath her scrubs from October through April. She found the envelope at 6:52. She had been assigned the break room on her rotation that morning, the staff lounge on the second floor, adjacent to the surgical prep area. She cleaned it last because it was the room people left the messiest, and because doing the hard thing at the end of her shift was a habit so old she could not remember starting it. She sprayed the counters, she wiped the table, she picked up 3 coffee cups someone had left in the sink, rinsed them, set them upside down on the rack. She pulled the chairs out to sweep beneath them. She was pushing the last chair back into place when she saw it. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. She opened it. She stood at the breakroom table at 6:52 in the morning after an 11-hour shift, looking at more money than she had held in her hands in her life. Her feet hurt. Her lower back had been a problem since the fall 2 years ago. When she slipped on a wet floor, she had just finished mopping and went down hard on the tile. And the workers' comp claim was settled for an amount that did not cover the chiropractor visits she still needed. She was tired in the specific way that overtime and bad sleep and worry produce together. A tiredness that is not just in the body but in the part of you that decides things. She counted it once. She stopped. She counted it again. $94,000. She set the envelope on the table. She sat down in the chair she had just pushed back into place. She looked at the envelope. She did not touch it for what she estimated was about 5 minutes. She was not tempted in the way people imagine temptation works, a sudden pull toward the wrong thing, easily resisted or not. It was slower than that. It was more honest than that. The money sat on the table, and her mind went somewhere specific and involuntary the way a mind does when it has been waiting a long time to be allowed to go there. She thought about her son Owen. He was 23. He had been in a motorcycle accident 14 months ago on Route 9 outside of Biloxi. He had walked away from it, technically. He walked away with a traumatic brain injury that the neurologist described as moderate to severe, words that sounded like they existed on a spectrum, but in practice meant that Owen could not hold a job, could not drive, could not always follow a conversation to its end, and woke up some mornings not sure where he was or what year it was. He lived with her. He would likely live with her for the rest of her life, or his, whichever ended first. She thought about the apartment. She had moved them both into a 2-bedroom on Clement Street after the accident, because the lease on her old place ran out and the new landlord had increased the rent by $400, and the math did not allow for sentiment about neighborhoods. The new apartment was smaller. The bedroom walls were thin enough that she could hear Owen's breathing at night, the particular pattern of it when he was having the dreams that woke him, which was 3 or 4 nights a week. She thought about the specialist in Boston, the Neurocognitive Rehabilitation Program. Owen's regular neurologist had mentioned it in passing at the last appointment. The way doctors sometimes mention things they do not believe are accessible to the person sitting across from them. Full program, 16 weeks. Intensive. The outcomes data for patients at Owen's injury stage was, according to the published studies she had read at the library on her days off, significantly better than standard outpatient care. The cost, not covered by their insurance, was $87,000. She looked at the envelope. $94,000 was not a number her life had ever contained. She sat with it for 5 minutes. She sat with what it could mean. She did not pretend she was not sitting with it. She just sat with it honestly, the way her mother had told her to sit with hard things completely, so you know what you are actually deciding. Then she stood up. She picked up the envelope. She walked out of the break room and down the hall to the nursing station on the second floor and set it on the counter in front of the charge nurse. "I found this in the break room," she said. "It needs to go to security." She did not leave her name. She clocked out at 6:59 and took the bus home. His name was Roland Vance. He was 64 years old. He had started Vance Medical Group at 31 with a partner, a borrowed office, and a contract to provide surgical staffing to 2 small community hospitals in coastal Mississippi. The partner left after 3 years. Roland did not replace him. He expanded instead. Regional surgical services, anesthesia groups, post-acute care management. By 50, he had a company that worked with hospitals across 12 states and employed 600 people, most of them in roles that required more trust than a contract could specify. People who showed up in the middle of the night to rooms where the difference between good and careless was sometimes a life. He had built the company on one belief, which was that the people who did the invisible work were the ones who determined whether everything else held together. The surgeons got the credit. The anesthesiologists got the liability. But the people who cleaned the rooms between procedures, who restocked the supply carts at 3 a.m., who made sure the floors were not a hazard, and the equipment was not contaminated, and the environment that a patient woke up in was not a source of additional harm. Those people were the load-bearing walls. Everything stood on top of them. Nobody looked at them. He had placed the envelope himself. Not as a test, not exactly. He had been thinking about what Mercy Harbor's board had asked him to do, which was to evaluate the hospital's support staff culture as part of a potential acquisition. He was not interested in the acquisition. He was interested in what he had noticed during his first site visit 2 weeks earlier, which was a custodian on the surgical wing at 4 in the morning who was cleaning a room with the kind of attention you cannot fake and cannot mandate. She wiped the equipment housing with a cloth, checked the corners of the room, realigned the supply cart so the labels faced outward, and then stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the room the way a painter looks at a finished canvas. Not proudly, assessingly. Like someone whose standard lived inside her and did not require an audience. He had asked a floor manager her name the next morning. Constance Webb, 11 years, never late, never a disciplinary note, highest cleanliness scores in her wing for 7 consecutive quarterly audits. He had gone home and thought about that for 2 weeks. The envelope was not a test. He had not decided what it was when he left it. He knew only that he wanted to understand something he could not quantify in the evaluation rubrics his team used. He did not know what he was looking for until he watched her walk to the nursing station with the envelope and set it on the counter without breaking stride, without looking around first to see if anyone was watching, without hesitation of any kind he could detect from the hallway where he was standing. He had been in the building since 6 that morning. He had not planned to stay. He had come back because he had forgotten a folder in the administrative conference room. And because, if he was honest with himself, he had been wondering since the day before whether the envelope would still be there in the morning. It was not there. She had it. And she was walking it to the nursing station at 6:55 a.m. after an 11-hour shift on the same feet she had been standing on since 10 the previous night. He followed her down the hallway, staying back. He did not follow her to the nursing station. He watched from the corridor. He saw her set it down. He heard her say the words. He saw her turn and walk toward the elevator without looking back. He stood in the corridor for a moment. He was not a sentimental man. He had not become the person he was by letting sentiment run ahead of information. But he had learned, across 30 years of watching how organizations actually worked versus how they said they worked, to recognize the thing that the numbers could not capture. It was not ambition. It was not skill. It was something quieter and harder to sustain. It was the decision a person made, every day, alone, about what kind of person they were going to be when the room was empty and nobody was keeping score. He asked the nursing station to hold the envelope. He asked them to note who had brought it in and when. He took the elevator to the administrative floor and made a phone call to his assistant. He wanted a personnel file not through official channels, directly. The file came back that afternoon. He sat in his rental car in the hospital parking lot and read it. 11 years at Mercy Harbor, hired at 40. Night shift custodial, surgical wing. Performance reviews that used the same words across every supervisor who had ever evaluated her. Thorough, reliable, never complains. One notation from 4 years ago. Requested a schedule modification for 2 weeks due to a family medical situation. Request approved. She returned on schedule. No further absences. No mention of the accident. No mention of Owen. Those things did not show up in employee files. They showed up in the spaces between the lines, in the emergency contact field that listed no spouse, only a son. In the address on Clement Street that his assistant had cross-referenced against rental data showing a 2-bedroom unit leased 14 months ago, the same month, roughly, as the accident report that was a matter of public record. He looked at the address. He looked at the date. He put the file on the passenger seat. He looked out the windshield at the parking lot. People were moving in and out of the hospital entrance. A man in scrubs. A woman with a visitor badge. An orderly pushing an empty wheelchair toward the side entrance. He drove to Clement Street. He did not know what he intended to do when he got there. He parked across the street and sat in the car. The building was 3 stories, painted a faded terracotta that had probably been a specific warm red when new and had since arrived at something closer to exhaustion. The buzzer panel beside the door had labels written in different hands, some in pen, some in permanent marker, some worn down to illegibility. He could see a light in a second-floor window. After about 20 minutes, a bus stopped at the corner. She stepped off. She was still in her work clothes. She was carrying a canvas bag and a prescription bag from a pharmacy, the paper kind with the staple at the top. She walked to the building entrance the same way she had walked down the hospital corridor. Purposefully, not fast, the pace of someone whose schedule did not have room for variation. She stopped at the mailbox in the vestibule. She pulled out 2 envelopes and a circular. She looked at one of the envelopes. She stood still for a moment. Then she put everything in the canvas bag and went upstairs. A light came on in the second-floor window. Roland sat in the car. He had attended board meetings where the stakes were in the hundreds of millions. He had negotiated contracts with hospital systems that employed thousands of people. He had sat across from people who made decisions about other people's lives with the kind of ease that comes from never having had to consider consequences for themselves. He recognized the weight of a decision, and he recognized when a person was carrying something heavier than they let show. The woman in that apartment was mopping surgical floors at 3 in the morning and reading neurology studies at the library on her days off and sending her entire discretionary income toward a son who needed a program she could not afford. She was doing this without telling her supervisors, without filing assistance claims, without performing her difficulty for anyone. She was just doing it, the way her employee file said she did everything, thoroughly, without complaint, without asking for anything in return. He wrote the address in his phone. He drove back to his hotel. He did not sleep well. She was born in Meridian, Mississippi, the second daughter of a woman who ironed other people's clothes for 40 years and a man who drove long haul until his back gave out and then drove local until there was no local left to drive. Her name was Constance because her mother had wanted a name that meant something about persistence, had looked through a book of names at the hospital and found it, and decided it sounded like a person who would not quit. Her mother was right about the name. Whether she intended it or understood it, at the time was another question. She had a sister, Delphine, 3 years older, who lived in Atlanta with her husband and 2 kids and called every Sunday at noon without fail, which was the only appointment in Constance's week that never moved. Delphine was the person who had driven through the night from Atlanta when the call came about Owen, who had sat with Constance in the hospital waiting room for 14 hours without once suggesting that everything was going to be fine, because Delphine knew her sister well enough to know that what she needed was not reassurance. What she needed was someone to sit in the bad thing with her. Constance had been married. His name was Kevin Webb. They were together for 9 years. Owen was 5 when Kevin left. He did not leave for another woman, or for a specific reason that could be named and therefore contained. He left because he had discovered, gradually and then all at once, that the life they had built together did not feel like the life he had imagined, and rather than examine that discovery, he had simply walked toward the door. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had not yet learned that the life you imagine and the life you live are not the same life, and that the one you live is the one that matters. Constance did not file for child support. She had done the same math that another woman in a different story had done before her, estimated the legal costs against the likelihood of collection, against the cost of hope. The math did not work. She went to work. She brought Owen to her mother's house in Meridian in the summer and to her sister's in Atlanta at Christmas, and made sure he had what she could provide, which was not everything and was not nothing. Owen had been a quiet child. Not shy, quiet. The kind of quiet that is a form of attention. He noticed things. He noticed when Constance was tired before she admitted it. He noticed when the neighbor's dog was missing before the neighbor put up signs. He learned to cook at 12 because he had noticed that she came home from the night shift and ate crackers standing over the sink, and he decided that this was not acceptable. He made her eat at the table. He made her meals from whatever was in the refrigerator, which were often surprising and sometimes very good. He had been working at an auto repair shop in Biloxi when the accident happened. He liked the work. He was good with his hands in the way that quiet people often are, with patience and precision and an indifference to the time a task required. His boss had told Constance at a point when she needed to hear it that Owen was the best young mechanic he had worked with in a decade. That was 14 months ago. Owen had not gone back to the shop. The shop had tried to hold his position for 3 months. Owen was not ready. He might not be ready for a long time. He might not be ready in the way the word ready usually means. What he was now was different from what he had been. The neurologist had words for the difference. Executive function impairment, memory consolidation, disruption. Post-traumatic fatigue syndrome. Constance had her own words, which were that her son was still in there. She could see him in the way he listened. In the way he still noticed things, slower now, with more effort, but still. She could see him in the drawings he had started making during his recovery, detailed mechanical drawings of engines and transmissions, hands remembering what his mind was still finding its way back to. She had put the drawings on the refrigerator, all of them. He had drawn 41 since the accident. The second week after the envelope, Roland Vance walked into Mercy Harbor's administrative offices without an appointment and asked to speak with the director of support services. The director, a man named Arthur Kipp, who had been in healthcare administration for 20 years, received him in a conference room and was clearly expecting to discuss the acquisition. Roland did not discuss the acquisition. He asked Arthur Kipp to describe the career development programs currently available to support staff. Arthur Kipp described them in the way administrators describe programs that exist on paper, thoroughly, with visible pride, and with no apparent awareness that none of the people the programs were designed to help had ever used them. The programs included a tuition reimbursement benefit, a professional development stipend, and a pathway program designed to allow custodial and food service staff to transition into certified patient care roles over 2 years. The enrollment rate, according to the documents Arthur Kipp pulled up on his laptop, was 2.1%. Roland asked why. Arthur Kipp gave an answer that was technically accurate and practically meaningless, something about awareness campaigns and scheduling conflicts, and the difficulty of reaching shift workers through standard communication channels. Roland looked at him for a moment. He had sat across from enough people like Arthur Kipp to know that This was not a failure of intention. Arthur Kipp almost certainly believed the programs were available. He had signed the paperwork, he attended the meetings. He had no mechanism for knowing that the staff he supervised had never been told the programs existed in any language that meant anything to their actual lives. Roland drove to Clement Street on a Tuesday morning. He had not called ahead. He had not announced himself through the hospital. He parked on the street and walked to the building and pressed the buzzer for 2B. Constance answered the door in a gray cardigan and jeans. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has opened a door to a person who does not fit the context. She did not fill the silence. She waited. He introduced himself. He told her what he had seen and what he had done and what he had found out since. He told her that he had placed the envelope and that what she had done with it was not what he expected, and not because he expected dishonesty. He had not known what he expected. He said this plainly. He was not a man who improved his prior reasoning in retrospect. Constance looked at him. "I don't take things that aren't mine," she said. He told her he was not there to reward her. He told her there was a position. Coordinator of Quality and Compliance for the Support Services Division of Vance Medical Group, a newly created role. It required developing and implementing the kind of training and accountability systems that existed only in handbooks nobody read. It paid $88,000 a year. The benefits package included full family medical coverage with a supplemental neurological care rider that covered intensive outpatient and inpatient rehabilitation for dependents. No pre-authorization delays for covered conditions. The rider had been added to the company's plan 3 years ago for a different reason. Almost no one used it. He said all of this in the language of structure, without sentiment, because he recognized that she was not a woman who responded to sentiment. She responded to information. Constance did not speak for a moment. She was looking at a spot past his left shoulder, not unfocused, focused on something internal. He understood the kind of calculation happening in that pause. He did not interrupt it. "Owen has appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said. "Neurologist on the second Tuesday of the month. I drive him. The position is remote 3 days a week. You would determine which days." She looked at him. "I haven't held an office job. You have 11 years of quality assurance experience. You have been conducting informal compliance audits of a surgical wing since before the term was in your job description. I watched you do it at 4 in the morning when you thought no one was looking. What you don't have is the title." He paused. "The title is correctable." She was quiet for a longer moment. Behind her, through the apartment, he could see the kitchen. On the refrigerator, drawings. Mechanical, detailed, precise. Laid out in rows across the freezer door and down the side panel, held with tape that had been applied carefully. Each drawing given space, each one given permanence. "I need to think about it," she said. He nodded. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped. "There's a training and certification program," he said. 12 weeks. Online. The company pays for it. It was written into the operating budget the year I started the division. The completion rate among employees it applies to is less than 3%. He looked at her. Not because people don't want it, because nobody told them about it in a way that made it real. He opened the door. "Whatever you decide, that's yours." He left. Constance stood in her kitchen. Owen was at the table behind her. He had a notebook open in front of him and a pen in his hand, and he was drawing with the slow, deliberate focus he brought to everything now, the effort visible and the result precise. He was drawing a carburetor from memory. She could tell by the shape of it. He did not look up. He had heard. She knew he had heard. He was the same person who had noticed her eating crackers over the sink at midnight when he was 12 years old. His processing was slower now. His conclusions arrived on a different timeline, but he still arrived at them. She did not say anything. She went to the refrigerator. She looked at the drawings, 41 of them. Engines and transmissions and mechanical systems drawn by hands that remembered what the rest of him was working to find again. She looked at them for a long time. She did not sleep that night. Not because of a shift. She was off on Tuesdays. She did not sleep because the thing Roland Vance had placed in front of her was not charity. It was not pity. It was a door, and she had learned a long time ago that doors were not free. You paid for them with the willingness to believe they would stay open, and she had been living in a house with no doors for long enough that believing had started to feel like a skill she had let atrophy. She sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning and worked through the logistics on the back of a grocery receipt. The position started in 3 weeks. The certification program was online. She could do it from the kitchen table after Owen was asleep. The neurologist appointments were on Tuesdays. Remote, 3 days a week meant Tuesdays could be remote. The math almost worked. Almost. The chiropractor was the variable she could not resolve. She had been going twice a month since the back injury. $45 a visit after insurance. She had been deciding between the chiropractor and Owen's prescription refill twice a month for 8 months, alternating which one she delayed. The new benefits package covered chiropractic at full cost after the deductible. The deductible reset in January, which was 3 months away. If she started the position now, the deductible would be current. The math changed. She got up. She went to Owen's room. She stood in the doorway. He was asleep. His breathing was even. The notebook was on the nightstand with the pen clipped to the cover. On the wall above his bed, he had taped a diagram he had printed from a library computer, a cutaway illustration of a V8 engine, with the components labeled in his handwriting, the letters careful and slightly uneven the way his handwriting was now, corrected by concentration rather than habit. She looked at the diagram. She looked at her son asleep beneath it. She went back to the kitchen. She picked up her phone. She found the number for Vance Medical Group in the information. Roland had left. She put the phone down. She picked it up again. She dialed. The call went to a voicemail. It was 2:14 in the morning. She had not thought about that. "This is Constance Webb," she said. "I'll take the position. I'll call during business hours to discuss the start date." She hung up. She sat at the table for a moment. Then she got up. She went to the refrigerator. She took one of Owen's drawings down, the first one he had made after the accident, a simple sketch of a wrench that he had drawn with his left hand because his right hand was still in the brace, lines uncertain but the shape unmistakably right. She had kept it separate from the others, not on the refrigerator, in the kitchen drawer where she kept things she could not look at every day and could not put away. She taped it to the refrigerator, above the others, in the place where the first thing goes. The first month was the hardest thing she had attempted since the 14-hour wait in the hospital corridor the night of the accident. She started on a Monday. She had driven to the Vance Medical Group regional office in Sacramento at Roland's suggestion to meet the team in person for the first week before transitioning to the hybrid schedule. She had left Owen with Delphine, who had driven up from Atlanta without being asked, who had arrived on Sunday evening with a bag that suggested she was planning to stay as long as she was needed. Constance had stood in the parking lot of her building when Delphine pulled up and had not said anything for a moment. Delphine had gotten out of the car and taken the bag from the back seat and looked at her sister. "Go," she said. "I've got him." The office was not what she had expected and was exactly what she had expected. She had a desk. She had a login. She had a badge with her name and her title printed on it that she placed face down on the desk for the first 3 days because looking at it made the gap between what it said and what she felt too visible. She had a laptop that was faster than anything she had owned personally and a headset for the calls that filled most of the first week, orientation sessions and introductions, and a benefits enrollment walkthrough she took twice to make sure she had not misread the line about the neurological care rider. She had not misread it. Owen had his first intake appointment at the Boston program 8 weeks after she started. She drove him. It was a 12-hour drive, and they stopped twice, once for gas and once because Owen wanted coffee, and she was not going to tell him no. They listened to the radio most of the way. Owen did not talk much in the car. He never had. He watched out the window the way he always had, and she watched the road, and it was the most normal 12 hours she had experienced in 14 months. The program coordinator at the intake assessment asked Owen what he was hoping to get back. Owen was quiet for a moment. The coordinator waited. Constance waited. She had learned, in the 14 months since the accident, that waiting was the most important thing she could offer him. Not prompting, not filling the silence. Just being in the silence with him until he found the end of the thought. "My hands know things my head doesn't know yet," Owen said. "I want to get there the other direction." The coordinator looked at him. She wrote something in the notebook. "That's exactly what we're going to work on," she said. In her third month at Vance Medical Group, Constance submitted her first compliance analysis to Roland. It was a 40-page document examining the information gap between available employee benefits and actual utilization rates across 18 hospital partnerships, organized by shift type, role classification, and communication method. Her recommendation was a direct outreach protocol using shift supervisors as liaisons rather than HR communication systems, because support staff did not read the HR portal and never had, and the company had been mistaking the existence of information for the delivery of it for 11 years. Roland read it in 2 hours. He sent one message to his assistant. Get the operations team on her calendar, not to review it, to implement it. The next quarterly report showed enrollment in employee development programs up across 7 hospital sites. The biggest increase was in overnight shift custodial and food service staff, the categories that had previously reported under 2%. Roland did not send a congratulatory email. He sent a question. "What did you say to them that we weren't saying?" She wrote back, "I told them it was real. I told them someone who used to mop floors was now the one sending the email." That's it. 6 months after he drove to Clement Street, Roland walked into the administrative conference room at Mercy Harbor for the acquisition meeting the board had requested. The meeting had been on his calendar for 90 days. He had rescheduled it twice. He sat across from Arthur Kipp and 3 members of the board and told them he was not interested in the acquisition on the terms they had structured. He was interested in a partnership structured around a specific investment, full redesign of the support staff development pipeline across the hospital, including direct outreach, scheduling accommodations, and an expansion of the supplemental benefits rider to all full-time support employees at the same tier that Vance Medical Group provided its administrative staff. Arthur Kipp started to explain the budget constraints. Roland looked at him. "I'm not asking you to fund it," he said. "I'm offering to. I've run the numbers. The cost of turnover in your support staff exceeds the cost of this investment by a factor of 3. This is not charity. It is arithmetic." The board agreed in principle before the meeting ended. In the parking lot afterward, Roland sat in his car for a few minutes. It was late afternoon. The hospital entrance was visible from where he was parked. A custodian was pushing a cart through the automatic doors. At the end of a shift, a woman in the same gray uniform Constance had worn for 11 years. She stopped at the entrance and said something to the security guard inside the door. The guard laughed. She went out into the parking lot. He thought about the morning he had placed the envelope. He had not known what he was looking for. He had told himself it was an assessment. He had told himself it was research. He understood now, with the particular clarity that comes after rather than before, that what he had been looking for was something he had lost the habit of seeing. Something that had always been there. Something that required him to stop moving fast enough to look at it. Owen called on a Wednesday afternoon in October, 8 months after the accident anniversary. Constance was at her desk in the Clement Street apartment, the laptop open, a cup of coffee going cold to her left. Owen was in Boston. He had been in the program for 6 weeks. He called at 4 p.m. every Wednesday, which had become the appointment. She answered on the first ring. "I adjusted a carburetor today," he said. She stopped typing. "In the motor skills lab," he said. "They have a bench with engine parts. I adjusted a carburetor and my hands just did it. I didn't have to think about the steps." She put her hand over her mouth. She did not make a sound. "Moms," he said, "I think I'm going to be okay." She looked at the refrigerator from her desk. The drawings were still there, all 41 of them plus the one she had moved from the drawer. The left-handed wrench at the top, the lines uncertain and the shape unmistakably right. Below them, the diagram from the library, the V8 engine with the careful uneven labels. Below that, a note she had taped up the week before, a printout of Owen's preliminary progress assessment from the program, one line highlighted in yellow. Patient demonstrates strong procedural memory retention in motor skill contexts. She had not told him she printed it. He would not have wanted her to. "I know," she said. She did not say it to comfort him. She said it because it was true. She had known since the night in the hospital corridor, through 14 months of nights and the grocery receipts, and the pharmacy bags, and the 2 a.m. kitchen table math, and the drawings on the refrigerator. She had known because knowing was the only option she had ever seriously considered. In March, the first employee completed Mercy Harbor's redesigned development pathway. Her name was not in any press release. She was a food service worker on the overnight shift who had been at the hospital for 7 years and had not known the certification program existed until Constance's direct outreach protocol identified her as eligible. And a shift supervisor sat down with her for 15 minutes and explained it in plain language over a cup of coffee in the break room. She was now a certified patient care technician. She told her shift supervisor it was the first time in 7 years anyone at the hospital had asked what she wanted. Roland heard this from Arthur Kipp, who told it the way a man tells a story when he has just understood something he should have understood sooner and is not yet sure whether to be proud or ashamed. Roland did not tell him which one to be. He told him to keep going. Roland Vance sat at his desk on a Thursday evening. The office was quiet. His team had gone home. He had not planned to stay late. He was reviewing the new enrollment data from Mercy Harbor and from 4 other hospital sites, the numbers that had been somewhere between 2 and 4% for the entire time his company had been in this industry, and that were now climbing toward 18, toward 22, toward figures that looked like what happens when information reaches the people it was designed for. He had a habit he had carried for years. Every December, the month before his company's fiscal year closed, he wrote a letter to his former mentor, a man named Douglas Price, who had given him his first contract and told him to build something worth the trust, and died before he could see whether Roland had. Roland never sent the letters. He kept them in a folder in his desk. He opened the folder. He looked at the last letter. He opened a pen. He wrote one line below the year heading. She carried the work when nobody was watching. I almost walked past it. He looked at the line. He did not revise it. He folded the letter and put it back in the folder and closed the drawer. He stood up. He put on his coat. He did not take the elevator. He walked down 3 flights of stairs and through the lobby and out into the evening and turned left on the street and walked. He had driven these streets for 30 years. He had approved the location of this office, approved the building, approved the lease. He had never walked the block at this hour. He walked now. It was cold. The foot traffic was thin. The restaurant on the corner was just turning on its lights for the dinner service. A woman in a uniform was pushing a cleaning cart through the door of the office building across the street. He watched her for a moment. Then he kept walking. Somewhere in this city, a woman who used to mop surgical floors at 3 in the morning was sitting at a kitchen table with a laptop and a cup of coffee, building something that the people who needed it had never been told existed. And her son was in Boston with his hands on an engine and a phone call ready for Wednesday. And the refrigerator on Clement Street still had 42 drawings on it. And the light in that apartment was the kind of warm that someone had chosen deliberately, because it mattered to them what the room felt like when they were in it. Some people in your building clean the floors you walk on. Some of them have been doing it for 11 years. Some of them have a file on a desk somewhere that says thorough and reliable and never asks for anything. And nobody has ever stopped to ask why a person who never asks for anything might have learned to stop asking. The asking did not stop because the need stopped. It stopped because the asking cost too much and returned too little for too long, and the person doing it finally decided that carrying it alone was preferable to the particular kind of disappointment that comes from reaching towards something that moves. If this story made you think of someone you have walked past, someone whose name you have not learned, whose load you have not noticed, start there. Not with a grand gesture. Start with the name. Start with Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon and a question you mean. Start with the willingness to be told something that changes what you do next. That is how it begins. That is how it has always begun.